Hello and welcome to Caged In Presents Coppola Connection, as ever brought to you by the Breadcrumbs Collective and hosted by me, Petros Patsilivus. This is episode 40. 40, baby. We've done it. A whole 40 episodes of Coppola Connections, and there's a whole lot more to come. Some of you may be asking, what does Coppola Connections mean? That must mean this is your first time listening. So what we do over here is we watch every single film in the collective Coppola family filmography to determine, are they the greatest film family of all time? I don't do that alone. This week, I will be saddling up and joined by Helen Sadler of the fantastic Flixwatcher podcast to talk about the 2003 Oscar-nominated Seabiscuit. But we'll get into that in all good time. As is always the case on the podcast, we will be talking about this film race by race. We will not leave any kind of, I don't know, my horse terms are not very good. We'll be leaving no stone unturned. We'll spoil the hell out of this. So if you haven't seen this film, check it out and come back and watch it. I'm sure you'll be able to catch it on ITV3 on a random Sunday. I'm sure it's probably, I don't know, US listeners, it's on cable somewhere. It may be streaming over there. I don't know. I don't live in America, guys. Well, anyway, guys, this episode was tons of fun. It was amazing to speak to Helen about a film I'd kind of put off for years, but we get all into that in this episode. So I guess all that's left to do is to collect up all of your sadness, befriend two men with equals amounts of sadness as your own, and train an underestimated horse as we make some Coppola connections. Today we saddle up, race to the finish line as we look at 2003 sports film Seabiscuit, nominated for 7 Oscars, directed and adapted to the screen by Gary Ross, from the non-fiction book Seabiscuit, An American Legend by Laura Hillenbrand. The film stars Tobey Maguire, Jeff Bridges, Chris Cooper, Elizabeth Banks, Gary Stevens, and William H. Macy. Produced by the powerhouse producers and Steven Spielberg's best mates, Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy, the film's cinematographer. And today's Coppola collection is our thoroughbred boy, Jonathan Schwartzman, to help me tame this film and see if it has the chops to prove the Coppolas are the greatest film family of all time, or if they deserve to be turned into glue. It is someone who is more used to delving through the Netflix back catalogue to find gems. It's the host of the Flixwatcher podcast, Helen Sadler. How are you, Helen?
I'm very good, Petros. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm ready and raring to go to talk about this film.
We're raring at the gate,
or the walking start, like depending on the stipulations of the race.
Of the horse's preference, that's it.
So before we get into talking about the film, question I wanted to ask you at the gate. Obviously, your surname is Sadler. Are you aware of the etymology of that surname and why it is so prescient to be talking about a film about a horse today?
I didn't even make the connection until you mentioned it, but I know that obviously a Sadler had something to do with horses, and my name has only got one D. So at some point along the family name, it lost the D, but kind of kept it. So presumably at that point, maybe they were Sadlers and then they weren't, possibly. I haven't been on there's websites where you can delve into your history. I haven't done any of that. So please wow me with the knowledge.
So the old English the old English and German word for a person who made saddles was saddle, so with one D, and obviously over time that's kind of the L shifted back and they've added an R on the end, and it's become Sadler. So it feels like a very fitting. Do you feel like the perfect guest? They're like, if you're going to tell me in a moment, you also have horses as well. I'm gonna be wowed completely, Helen.
Well, my husband does work at Ascot Racecourse, which is where the horses do the racing and the Queen goes. And he was able to answer some horse-related questions that I had when I was watching this. So there's a little bit of a horse support network I have there.
Amazing. I look forward to finding out what tidbits he told you. So yeah, as we get started on the podcast, I always like to ask, like, tell us what Flixwatcher is about. What is it you guys kind of do there? You've been going for ages, right? As well.
We have. I can never remember how many years it is, but we've released around 250 episodes, so we're that old. So we're a Netflix review podcast, and in each episode we have two guests joining myself and Kobe, and one of those guests will have picked a film that is available for viewing on Netflix. We have a little bit of a chat about it. Usually I say it's not very good. No, not always. And then we will rate it using our unique scoring, and those scores will go into a table which you can have a look and see which the top rated films are and the ones are at the bottom. So it's a great way to discover perhaps some hidden classics on Netflix that you didn't know were there. And also we have a lot of podcasters on there as well. So if you listen to it, you might find your new favourite podcast. And yourself, you've been on there as well as a guest.
Yes. So, has Seabiscuit ever been on Netflix? I'm not sure if I've vaguely ever seen it. It's a film I avoided for years. So,
I don't think it has. It's one of those that it kind of came out and it feels very, very, very much of its time, and it is very much what it is. It's very, very Oscar baity, and I don't know. I don't think it really did anything in the UK, just because we don't really. I mean, I'd never heard of The Horse before, and the only reason I'd heard of it is because I was a Tobey Maguire fan. So it's one of those kind of weird ones that it kind of did what it was supposed to do, sort of, and then disappeared, and no one ever talks about it. And it's kind of like, if you look for it, you'll find it, but it's not really one of those ones that people go, oh yeah, I was just watching Seabiscuit at the weekend. Isn't that a great film? People are like, oh, maybe I've heard of it, but I've never seen it. And that's kind of the vibe with Seabiscuit, I think.
Yes. Very much. It's a mum and dad film, I find. I recently told my mum I was watching. She's like, "Oh, Seabiscuit, good film, really, really like that one." And that's kind of. I think that was my prejudice of why I never watched it for years. I was like, it just seems like a bit of a dad film. So kind of. I was well. We'll get into my thoughts on it a bit later, before we do get into our thoughts. When did you first become aware of the Coppola family, Helen? And the kind of, was there an entry point of a person, and when did it kind of, I don't know, the penny drop that there's kind of other members of the family and they're so interconnected?
So I can pinpoint this exactly. So one of my favourite films when I was about 12 years old, maybe 12, 13, was Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is very famously directed by the Godfather himself, Francis Ford Coppola. And I had the poster on my wall. I loved the soundtrack. I had it on VHS. I was big into Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder, and I loved it. And that was like my entry point, even though I knew he'd done The Godfather, and I kind of knew that part 3 had been a bit crap because he'd cast his daughter, but I didn't really understand The Godfather that much. And it wasn't till many years later that I watched those. And then I think it was more a bit later that I kind of realised that Nick Cage was vaguely related, and kind of got into his action films around Face Off. So my dad used to get Empire, so I used to read that a lot. So there was lots of bits going around. But yeah, kind of late 90s, but specifically, he's always been the director of Bram Stoker's Dracula for me.
Yeah. You're saying about Sofia Coppola getting cast in Godfather Part 3. Originally was supposed to be Winona Ryder, which many would argue would have made it a lot better film. Like you can kind of see that lineage of Al Pacino and Diane Lane kind of, no, not Diane Keaton kind of, yeah, she kind of embraces both of those. She's got like that anger from Pacino and the kind of kookiness that Keaton kind of has. So she would have been perfect. Sophia, you're a good director. Let's leave it at that. Have you ever had the good fortune of meeting a Coppola at all, Helen?
I haven't, no. Sadly not. I mean, not even like the slightly smaller ones. So not yet. But, maybe one day one of them may be a guest on Flixwatcher. You never know.
You never know. Yeah, you never know. If you go to enough film festivals and stuff like that, or screenings in London, who knows? Sophia might be knocking about, or Jason Schwartzman might be there in a tweed suit following Wes Anderson about. Who knows? What would have been I always feel weird with this one because I know unless you're kind of Roger Deakins or like kind of one of the super cinematographers, people don't tend to look out for cinematographers that much. But do you know what would have been the first John Schwartzman film you would have seen?
So I was having a look, and I think it probably would have been like The Rock.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, The Rock, Armageddon, that definitely is the kind of era of films that I would have seen, but obviously not really like even acknowledged probably at that time that there would have been a cinematographer. I would have seen them as being like Michael Bay films anyway. So
yeah, there's
the Rock definitely.
There's obviously an argument to be made that Jonathan Schwartzman could be blamed for like Michael Bay's aesthetics. Obviously, he worked on two of those like earlier, very big, big films when he was establishing what was a film to Michael Bay. But I don't know. I do also know that Michael Bay is prone to on set kind of if he's not happy, he will just grab the camera and be like, I'll shoot it then. So I'm not sure if it's kind of you will bend to my will, Jonathan. This is how the film should look. Upskirt shots wherever you can, please.
I mean, I don't. Michael Bay does a thing, and he's very good at doing that thing. Yes. And I kind of like a bit of Bay action, a bit of Bayhem every now and again. And you kind of think about like he was also worked with him on Pearl Harbor,
yes.
And for all its faults, I mean, it looked great. And, it definitely, I think the same as Seabiscuit, it definitely kind of ticked all the boxes that it needed to do. I mean, it wasn't like great, but, it kind of did what it did. So yes. I was kind of surprised when doing a bit of like research for this that Seabiscuit and Armageddon are kind of like on his CV, but, just shows you can, your variety that you have really.
Yeah, and I don't think it's an insult to him, but he does very much seem like a journeyman like cinematographer. Whereas like I don't know to draw back to like Roger Deakins, people kind of get him because they have like, do you know what I mean? They want his kind of specifics that he can kind of draw out. Even though I don't know, I guess it is the job of a cinematographer to figure out what the director's wishes are and their kind of vision and kind of replicate that on screen the best they can. So I guess being a silent, or a kind of invisible cinematographer is kind of a good thing, I guess, in some ways. I don't know if they kind of overshadow, like if you're there going too much of like, this shot. Do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of, I don't know.
I think if you can look at a film and go, that's Deakins, that's a kind of like a special skill. I mean, he's probably the GOAT, I'd say. He's someone who most people would be able to probably connect a few of his films or be able to make that connection, where I think not that many cinematographers really have that. I think he's kind of like, top tier. Definitely. But definitely John Schwartzman, he's the kind of journeyman, but someone who can also handle action.
Yes.
which I think is definitely evident in this, in being able to, which I was watching it, I think it's quite a hard task to be able to kind of film horse racing as it happens, because obviously when we watch it on TV, it's very much like a static camera and it will just kind of like film them going round. So be able to try and get you into the position of the jockey and be kind of in with the action is quite a tricky thing to do, whereas blowing up some kind of spaceship feels quite easy in comparison.
Saying that, Armageddon has like, watching it back recently, it's got some really mad shots in there as well. There's like scenes where it's kind of all in like fisheye and stuff like that, and they just absolutely batshit bananas. And I've got a big soft spot for that film. I own it on a French Criterion Blu-ray DVD. I'm a big fan of Armageddon. Well, yeah, let's. Now that feels like a perfect segue to talk about Seabiscuit. And before we do, let's quickly listen to the trailer.
To the future!
I'll take him.
He's got a fractured foot.
You're gonna shoot him anyway, I'll save you the bullet. Red Pollard, Mr. and Mrs. Howard.
Hi. Hello.
Of course, it's nuts.
Well, at least he wasn't expensive.
Every horse is good for something. You don't throw a whole life away just 'cause it's banged up a little.
He just needs to learn how to be a horse again.
How far do you want me to take him?
Till he stops.
Let's see what you got, boy.
Fast?
Your horse just broke the track record at Tamfran.
So, Helen, before I ask you for a synopsis, let's get some little stats. So this film was made on a budget of $87 million with a box office return of $148.3 million. It had a release date of the 25th of July 2003 and had a beautiful score by Randy Newman. Something I've noted down because, definitely want to dive into that a bit later. So can you tell us what is Seabiscuit about, Helen?
So I'm not going to do sort of a plot narrative because it jumps around all over the place, but essentially Seabiscuit is a horse that enjoys eating and sleeping. Who doesn't? And he's kind of like been labelled small, lazy and unmanageable until one day Chris Cooper comes along with his horse whisperer magic and basically takes him under his wing at the same time as taking under his wing Tobey Maguire's Red, who, a bit like Seabiscuit, is a bit damaged, a bit unmanageable, and, let's face it, blind. So, like, Seabiscuit is a horse with an injury and he's an ex-boxer with an injury, and together they make a beautiful partnership and win loads of races, and everyone loves it, and it's set during the Depression.
Perfect, yeah. And it is that thing, there's a kind of there's a moment at the end, like a kind of caveat to the film where it's like the thing that's been signposted throughout, and it's like Tobey Maguire's voiceover going, people thought that we found that horse and made it better, but what really happened is the horse made us better. And it's like, I know, we've been watching this for the past 2 hours and 20 minutes. We know that the film is that's what it's about, the people. But what I didn't realize is it just really fits the archetypes of like a sports movie. And I love sport. I don't know why I'm not massively into sports, but I love the kind of redemptive arc or the kind of like Do you know what I mean? Like the classic peaks and trough of like the rise, the fall, and then the rise again at the end. And this film beautifully portrays that. So, um, what are kind of some of the early moments in this? Oh, well, let's go back even further. When did you first see this film? Like, what's your kind of relationship with it? What made you pick it?
So I am a bit of a Tobey Maguire fan. So I don't think I saw it at the cinema because it was one of those ones that was a bit like, you know what a Seabiscuit is? Oh, looking at the poster, it's a Romance with a Horse, possibly. And I definitely would have seen it maybe a couple of years afterwards when it would have come to like DVD or like Sky or something. So definitely saw it then. Hadn't seen it since, and thought it would be an interesting one to revisit. Kind of in the light of, you know, Tobey Maguire's made a little bit of a resurgence with his. I mean, can we say it? I mean, everyone knows he's in the most recent Spider-Man. It's been spoiled, hasn't it? And yeah, just thought it would be nice to go back to it because I really don't think many people saw it, and it's one of those films that it's a little bit unremarkable because the story is very much kind of like a classic underdog. In this, we've got like two underdogs in like the horse and Tobey Maguire's character, but it is a really nice film and it's really well made, and there aren't that many kind of like horsey sports films around, so it's kind of nice to have a sports film that isn't like overly macho and really like testosterone-y, kind of like whoa, yeah, and it's actually quite sensitive. And watching it back, it looks really lovely as well. I mean, it's got all those like rolling hills and autumn tree scenes as well with the horse, and there's just like some really like lovely moments with the horse as well. So yeah, I was hoping that it will have aged quite nicely and would be an interesting to revisit.
Definitely, yeah. This was a first time watch for me, and as I said, like I kind of wrote it off. I don't know why. For the longest time, I thought it was a Spielberg film for some reason. I think like because I think it does have the Amblin connection, and kind of like has that vibe of around that time. It kind of seemed like Spielberg was very much like vying for, do you know what I mean? And going
It's
for the
Oscar
Oscars.
baity.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I'll do Saving Private Ryan. I'll do something that's like period set. Like, yeah. And then obviously, yeah, directed by Gary Ross. Had you seen Pleasantville at all before you would have seen this? Because that's another Tobey Maguire's in that, right?
Yep, he's in that. Yeah, I would have seen that, which I love that film. I think that's a great one. So yeah, definitely seen that. And I think he also did the Hunger Games as well, a bit more recent, the first one.
He's got an interesting career. He's only got 6 directing credits, and well, one of them is a documentary short for the Hunger Games cast interview, so I don't think that counts. So he's done 5 features. Free State of Jones I haven't seen, and I haven't seen. He did Ocean's 8 as well. It all seems a bit eclectic and mad. Like Pleasantville and Seabiscuit, I can kind of understand, like because Pleasantville is kind of again period set, is it? It's a 50s set film.
Yeah, it's definitely an eclectic mix. I have seen Ocean's 8, which is a film, and yeah, definitely feel as though he kind of probably peaked in. I think Pleasantville and Seabiscuit are weirdly they're quite 2 companion pieces, so I think they'd probably make quite a good double bill if you were looking to have a Tobey Maguire double bill, which you know, who wouldn't?
Well, one of the things, like I was watching through the special features on the DVD, and it's like you definitely get the feeling from Gary Ross that this is something he's like was really passionate about. He said like I love this kind of story. I love the period. He's like he wrote the film with Toby in mind, so kind of had that to him. And there's this great kind of anatomy of a scene he does where he talks about his process where when he's doing his shot list, he doesn't just write the camera's here, this is what we see, this is what we see. He kind of writes the emotion to it as well. So why the camera is there, like what are we trying to convey to the audience? So the scene that it conveys is the moment we get early on in the film, 17 minutes in, because I kind of noted this because I am crying because we kind of have these at the beginning. We have these kind of disparate stories of Tom Smith, Chris Cooper's character. We have Charles Hudson, played by Jeff Bridges, and Red Pollock. These kind of three soon to be entangled stories, but in the Charles Houston one, there's that moment where his son like sneaks off in the car to go fishing, and that's the scene that like he breaks down and says like, what we'll do when we shoot him in the car, we'll do a low angle so we can really show the audience kind of how small he looks in the car, kind of have these establishing shots of all of the things that he'll be picking up. So when obviously the car crashes, like they will be the things that kind of we see without seeing the body in the car and stuff like that. And it's kind of, I don't know, he's like, his process to it sounds really interesting and kind of like, it's not just like, I don't know, like the technical side of it. He wants the audience to emote, and it's kind of, it's fascinating to kind of hear that from a director of, I'm not just going what will aesthetically look good. And even down to like the funeral shot, he says like his notes say like, do a wide angle shot far away, give them privacy, give them space. And the shot of Jeff Bridges crying, kind of cradling his son on the porch, was done with like a telescopic lens as well to kind of, again, like give us that sense of distance that, I don't know, you kind of feel like you're in that moment as an audience member. I felt like I was prying in on a moment I shouldn't be seeing, almost like kind of, I'm devastated as well. I'm someone with a young son, and I was like, no, don't kill the kid so early on. Like, no, like we've literally seen him for 2 scenes, once as a baby and now as a kind of precocious kid who wants to read Flash Gordon comics.
It got you. I mean, so many other directors would have gone for kind of a dramatic sort of long shot of the car flying off the cliff face and into the water, and made it a kind of incredibly violent event. But by showing that, it, the sort of his packed lunch floating, it is really emotional. And I think that's really interesting to hear how, he's kind of looking at the family's privacy. I think it's a really sensitive way of approaching filmmaking, because a lot of people would kind of like zoom in on the grief and like really go hard on it and be like, you must cry, whereas he's giving you like these little cues, and for you it was kind of like your parental kind of feelings kicking in, knowing that you've got like a little person and they're having interests, and you can kind of like feel that in your life.
And there's another moment that got me quite early on as well, when I was kind of like, I'm in trouble here, I'm going to be a wreck by the end of this film. It's the moment where Red's parents basically like sell him, or like give it, like they sell him, right? They sell him to kind of like a rancher to be like, you got a career in horses, kid. Like, don't fritter away your dreams. Here's your books. Like, I think it's when his dad said, I've even got your old Milne in there. I was like, he wrote Winnie the Pooh. I was like, that's tragic. That's like, it's so sad.
The journey from sitting around the family table reciting bits from books, which pre-TV entertainment looked like a riot, to basically being sold to a life of pain. It's a pretty quick journey that all of the sort of 3 characters make, from everything being great to everything being like really depressing, which I think is a kind of great way of being able to kind of explain the depression without having to kind of give facts and figures and sort of like over tell the story of it. But and his family are like, oh, we'll write to you, and like we never see them again.
Yes. And from my research, like that is what actually happened to the real Red in real life as well. Just imagine like those times, like if somebody moved, like it's not like now, I don't know, especially around that Depression era time, it's kind of crazy. And there's, I think what this film does really well, especially in those establishing moments, that kind of first half hour, is it does really clever character development without kind of like signposting too much, just kind of like really subtle things. There's that shot we get of Chris Cooper kind of riding across the fields, and he comes to a barbed wire fence, and in the kind of background we see like a kind of car racing up the road, and like he just looks perplexed at the fence, and it is this kind of like, you just get that immediate feeling that he's a man from the old world, and he's gonna have to find a way to, I don't know, yeah, like he's past it. Like, is he gonna have to, I don't know, fit into this new way of fandangled cars, or is he gonna still be able to live his life as this horseman? And we get, yeah, shots of him kind of, what is it, like riding the trains, and like kind of with other disheveled looking men kind of living that hobo lifestyle, and kind of, yeah, it's, but yeah, the characters converge when we get to Tijuana. What do you make of kind of the set design and the kind of the look of this film and the kind of costumes, Helen?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I completely forgot like there was any kind of bits in Mexico and stuff. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Like, it must have been a completely like wild time, because on one hand you've got the Depression, and then the other hand they've got like this like secret life almost in Mexico, where they're all just drinking and racing horses and fighting. And don't they say that's where Jeff Bridges' character goes for like a quickie divorce, and that's where you go to get those things. But it's very much like, you can tell there's a lot of thought going into catching the details, and the costumes are great, and Tobey Maguire's haircut is very much of the time, with his kind of red curls, and it's one of those ones where you can kind of feel fully immersed in it, and you can kind of go along with everything because there's so much attention to detail, and it just looks really great.
Yeah, we get some amazing shots. Well, there's a particular shot I loved in that Mexico sequence when we're with Red, and he kind of like goes to start a race, and then they kind of get this crane shot that kind of moves on up and kind of like dips back into like a side, I don't know, like garden almost. And it's when Chris Cooper's character saves that horse from being shot, and it's just like, the kind of juxtaposition from this kind of, yeah, we got Charles and his kind of hoity-toity friends all kind of living it up, betting on the horses and stuff like that, and then you've got Chris Cooper there, kind of, I don't know, like less, do you know what I mean, less than his bottom dollar to his name, kind of like, and still has compassion. Again, yeah, just great character development like that. That's as much as it is kind of, it's very that it does get into, there is stuff in this that is very signposty, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, as much as I said, like, there's some nice character, there are moments where it's like, this guy is very nice to horses. Remember that.
I think my favorite of that is where it's kind of like the meet cute of Red and the horse, and Chris Cooper is there watching Seabiscuit basically be unmanageable, and he's kicking, and he's like, the jockey can't control him, and he's all like wild and all over the place. And then just over his shoulder, Red is like Seabiscuit, and he's fighting and he's punching and everything, and it keeps going backwards and forwards. It's like, do you get it? If you didn't, we're going to go back one more time. And you're like, oh, we got it the first time. And it goes back, and then it goes back again. So it's kind of, I kind of forgive it because I think the movie is quite cute, but I think maybe now audiences might be a bit like, oh, this is a bit cheesy, but
a bit eye-rolly.
You've kind of got to go with it with this film. This is the kind of storytelling that was of a thing during it's it's a classic noughties film. So
it's schmaltzy, and like no more so than there's moments, I think, quite early on, Red's kind of, he's gonna give up on them and like run away, and we just get like we get like voiceover of like moments we've seen before where it's like, you've got a real gift, kid, like, don't squander it, like, go with this man. And it's like, okay, we could have had some visual story, we didn't need that added in to tell us that he's having second doubts. He could have just like kind of, I don't know, walked back. Do you know what I mean? Like, just with a facial expression could have conveyed the same thing, but the film's like, no, like you remember that thing you saw 10 minutes ago. We're going to bring that right back up for you. So what are the?
It's not really much suspense going on, is there? It's a bit like you're just kind of waiting for it to happen. You're like, oh yeah.
Yes, but I think that is the kind of thing of sports movies, right? They kind of have this archetype, and it's almost like you'd be disappointed if they don't kind of if they don't fulfill it. So what do you think of this as a sports movie? Does it do the sports movie well?
Yeah, I would say it does, because it's basically classic underdogs. They've kind of both been written off. They, there's kind of some nice montage of sort of their training, and there's some, like, when they're kind of getting to after they've gone through the kind of chatty battle about war admiral, different horse, and they start on kind of like their Rocky training montage, and they have to race in the dark. And there's some really nice kind of like editing about them training the horse to like run on the bell, and it's filmed at night, and the horse has to run through the night. So you've got kind of like your training montage, and then there's kind of the moment which comes a bit later on, where there's the injury, like the shock injury, and it's leading up to the big race, and there's lots of emotions going on, and then the race happens and it's all great, and then there's a bit more, and then there's more injuries, the horse gets injured, and so there's like a roller coaster of emotion, and it kind of ends on that really nice sort of high note, and it doesn't get turned to glue, which is it could have been that it ended like with, unfortunately, he was shot, but it doesn't end like that.
One thing I was really surprised with this as well is a lot of these kind of based on a true story films end with like 3 pages of like postscript of kind of like, do you know what I mean? You're there having to pause the DVD, being like, it'll be like, and then Red Pollock went on to do this, and Charles Hudson did this, and Tom Smith did this. This film's just kind of like, no, the only thing I imagine that would be done like nowadays is it would have ended a little bit, I don't know, just kind of directors trying to be a bit more edgy. Like, it doesn't matter if he wins that last race. We're just gonna like, do you know what I mean? We're gonna end the film before then. Whereas this one's like, nah, he wins by a country mile. And I know that when they came to shoot the actual horse races, because obviously there is footage of like the War Admiral race and stuff like that. A lot of these, were caught on like film. The choreographer, they had to choreograph all of the races, which sounds like just so they could kind of, I don't know, match those races. And obviously there's people out there who'd probably be real anoraks being like, well, actually, I think you'll find that this racer was a little bit further back in that race or whatever, or like all that kind of stuff. And the way they did that is they actually got the jockeys they just they rehearsed so much, got the jockeys to kind of run round the track as well, like to kind of know where everyone was. And the way they filmed, you mentioned about John Schwartzman and kind of getting those shots of the people on the horses. They got the special effects guys to create, it's essentially like a kind of mechanical rocking horse,
a fake horse.
Yeah, which like just it like had the same movement of it looks wicked. I'm not sure if you've seen footage of them kind of riding.
I haven't seen it, no.
It's attached to they called it the SS Seabiscuit, because it looked almost like an aircraft carrier, that they kind of this big truck thing where they had these 2 horses side by side. So those moments, I think, in that final sequence where we have Red and George kind of talking to each other, you kind of get a glimpse of that kind of from afar, how it was like how it would have looked when it's not kind of filmed up close and personal, seeing the faces and stuff like that. But so I think technically on stuff like that, it's great. Like you feel, I don't know, invested, you feel excited, right, when you're watching the races. It's like, and no offense to your husband, but like as a a non-meat eating kind of animal lover, I do oppose horse racing. I still found myself kind of swept up in all of it.
But it's interesting you should say that because it's obviously there's different types of racing. So you have jump racing, which is obviously the one that the Grand National is, in which horses tend to get injured, and then flat racing is just quite standard. So they very rarely have
Yes.
injuries in that. But I was going to ask you whether you've ever been to a horse race, which I guess possibly not.
No, I haven't. One, I think my kind of social standing, it was never the kind of thing I would be going to anyway, and it's never really appealed to me. I think it's the kind of like reason I never watched this film as well. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, is the working class kid in me was like, nah, I don't want to watch anything about load of rich people and their horses.
It's kind of interesting because it's the vibration of the horse and the sounds of when it goes round is quite something, and the atmosphere is very intense. And obviously, as Seabiscuit gets more popular, he kind of becomes a bit of this sort of like icon for the working class people and for
Yes.
the poor people. They all come out and see him. So to be at one of those races with all of those kind of people in like the cheap seats as well, so it would have been the people in the stands, but also there at the racetrack, the atmosphere would have been kind of insane.
Yeah. I love those kind of shots, and I like this shot. I imagine some of it is kind of finding archival like photos and stuff like that, especially when you get those moments with William H. Macy as this kind of what is he, like a kind of disc jockey, kind of like got his own sound effects, and so all of a sudden it will be like doing like horse clacking and stuff like that. I'm gonna walk over to this lady right now and ask her what she thinks about it. Yeah, we get those shots of like people up trees and stuff like that, and I imagine like I don't know, yeah, like restored images of what it would have actually looked like there, and looks like it's meticulously recreated as well. Yeah, I can. That's what I mean. I can buy into it as somebody who's like opposed to it. I was like, yeah, wicked. Like, ride that horse. Like, I want it to win. Just don't turn it to glue. um, so you mentioned you're a big fan of Tobey Maguire. How do you think he does in this film? What do you kind of think of his kind of character development and his performance?
Yeah, so obviously he's a little bit taller than what you'd expect to be as a jockey, and they kind of acknowledge that. So this was kind of like really interesting because I think this came in between Spider-Man. So he had to do a fair bit of kind of like bulking up and bulking down, and I think it's kind of like depends on what stories you sort of believe, and there was some kind of maybe some bartering around him trying to get a bit more cash out of paying for Spider-Man 2 by extending the work on this. And I think he picked up some sort of back injury from this. So in his kind of like list of films to go like from Spider-Man to this is kind of interesting. But this performance is very much what it's quite similar. He was in the Cider House Rules. I don't know if you've seen that one.
No,
Kind of like
I
a
know
similar
era.
similar vibe. Yeah, sort of he kind of played a type, I think, around a certain kind of period. But this is slightly different in his kind of like really sort of scrawny boxer phase where he's kind of like a bit crazed. And I think he's great. So yeah, it was sort of Cider House Rules, but with a bit of like brawn and fightiness in it. But I think he's great. I think he manages to be completely believable as this basically poor kid who was deserted and has basically had to kind of scrap and fight in not very nice conditions. And then when suddenly he's sort of shown kindness, he's not quite sure how to do it. And he's got like loads of anger and issues that he tries to work through. And through this like lovely relationship with the horse, he kind of mellows out a little bit through it. So he kind of like grows as a character with it. And for me, I find him believable and with him all the way on his journey.
Yeah, and there's I like to think it's a direct reference to Spider-Man. There's a moment where it seems like he has his spidey senses because the race where Seabiscuit gets hurt, he's kind of sat on a porch and he can like feel it and sense it as a woman's beating a rug and stuff like that. He can kind of feel the race, and as Seabiscuit goes down, it's almost like he's like like he's kind of like almost like convulsing at the thought of it happening and stuff like that. I was like, still got those bloody spidey senses as old Toby. Yeah, I think I think he's really great in this, and he kind of, I don't know, he's got a look of him, this look of like just wonderment all the time and stuff like that. Like something about his face I always find like fascinating, especially around this era of his career, and kind of like, I don't know. I think his the way he plays, and the character as well is fantastic in the way that like he's super believable in that, like you get like glances from him when he's being loaded onto the train after he's come out of the hospital, and he sees George standing with Charles, Tom, and Marcella. He's kind of, you still get that thing that he's there still trying to get rid of that kind of beast on his back, that he's not good enough, or kind of he just always has this like chip on his shoulder, and he conveys that so well, just in like glances and stuff like that. His kind of facial expressions, and a lot of some great face acting,
Like the
Tobey
sad
Maguire and
eyes,
stuff. Yes.
like when he definitely feels really hurt when he finds out that they've been they've been trying out Seabiscuit after his injury. So basically, he breaks his leg in quite a horrific way, and Seabiscuit hurts his foot. And basically, they're both sort of told that he'll never ride again. Seabiscuit will never race again. He'll barely even be able to walk. And through like a lovely little montage, they take it nice and slow, but they kind of nurse each other back to health. And then, just as you think like, oh, maybe they could race, the sort of like the betrayal where you see them all with his jockey mate is just like, it's like real heartbreak, because he's done this journey with him, and he knows that they're going to take the horse away from him and he's not going to be able to race. And it's just like, your heart goes.
Yeah, so the mate you're talking about, George, right, is played by Gary Stevens, who was a real life jockey, at least. He only retired in like 2018, I think, and got in 1996 won an award that is like awarded to people, like it's the George Roosevelt, or was his name, or George? Yeah, it's the kind of George Roosevelt Award for jockeys, basically, which is kind of a cool little tidbit I found.
Yeah, it's good that they managed to bring in some actual jockeys in there, because I think it definitely gives a lot of realism to it. And one of the questions that I was asking, I was like, to my husband, was like, do you really think like jockeys would have like had conversations as they were riding? And he was like, yeah, they kind of like chat to each other as they go along, and like they probably wouldn't beat each other with the whips. I think that is very much frowned upon. But yeah, apparently they have like little chats and might say some bits to each other as they're racing along. Yeah. So accurate.
Bit of smack talk. Yeah. You mentioned the kind of like hitting them with the kind of whip and stuff like that. That very much seems like he's at like what would be the equivalent of like Destruction Derby, like horse racing back. Do you know what I mean? Kind of no holes bars, a bit like, yeah, the kind of the life he's leading at that moment, Red, it is very much that kind of racing, kind of barnyard boxing. It is all kind of seems a bit under the table. Do you know what I mean? Like a bit dodgy and stuff like that. A bit like, yeah, I found that quite amusing. That there's, I don't know, it's illegal horse racing. They're a bit violent, stuff like that.
Well, if you tried to ride a horse, it's pretty hard going. And yes. If he's trying to have a fight whilst riding a horse, which is a pretty terrifying thing to do, because those horses are fast, and yet he's there trying to have a fight on a horse as is racing.
So yeah, we've discussed Tobey Maguire. Like, let's talk about some of the other cast in this. What do you think? What do you make of Jeff Bridges and Chris Cooper in this film as well?
It kind of feels that they're just like really perfectly cast in these sort of aging old men with kind of like slightly harsher exteriors, but really soft on the inside. I mean, it's always a pleasure to have both of them in the film, and they're kind of, when you kind of see a film and you're watching it and their name comes up in the trailer, you're like, oh, I know where I am with these guys. Like,
Yes.
you know, they always put in a good show, and you know, you can always rely on them to be a good character, be an interesting character. So yeah, it's a good cast, and yeah, they're great.
I like the fact that just the year before, Chris Cooper would have worked with Nicolas Cage in adaptation as John LaRoche, and he's well suited to these kind of, I don't know, very like outsider characters who kind of like, in the case of John LaRoche, probably not a good guy. In the case of Tom Smith, like this kind of seems a bit rough, but like as you said, he's got this rough exterior but a heart of gold, and kind of, don't know, still knows his way around plants as well. He's putting some kind of root on
The horse, yeah.
yeah.
And they had to age him for this.
Uh-huh.
And I think people were surprised that when they saw him in this, they were like, he's got teeth. And he's like, I do have teeth. I just didn't have them for adaptation. So he's one of the ones that seems to be, this was his period for being digitally altered, I think, was
Yes.
what people might remember him for.
Yeah, I think in regards to aging him up, they like even shaved in his hairline a bit like higher up to like kind of give him a bit more of a widow's peak, and dyed his hair white. Yeah, he looks. They're both him and Bridges. I love Jeff Bridges, and I think he plays this kind of, I don't know, almost like he's like a playboy, isn't he? He's kind of got all this money to do what he wants, but again, like he's got this talisman of this grief hanging around his neck that is kind of like, I don't know, I could become a real prick here, but he's kind of like, his heart seems like in the right place, and it kind of leads me on. What do you think of the kind of relationship and the kind of the character of Marcella as portrayed by Elizabeth Banks?
It's kind of an interesting one because she's kind of in the background a little bit, and I was reading that in real life she was actually related to his first wife, I think, in some way. So that's how they came to know about it. So
it's something bizarre, like she was the sister of one of his, like his son who died, like the sister of one of his friend's mums or something like that. So yeah, it was a bit more like, it wasn't this kind of meet cute at a bullfight that we see in the film. It was a bit more like they knew each other before then. That doesn't make for interesting. So that's a kind of story all on its own, isn't it? This kind of like woman moving in on a like kind of grief-stricken man, or kind of like love found in that turbulent time of grief. Yeah.
I guess she feels a little bit underused, but then the story isn't really around her. But she kind of like, she plays like a supporting, the motherly kind of role to Red that he never had, and she sort of is kind of like the guiding voice as well for Jeff Bridges as Charles. So like Elizabeth Banks does a good job with not that much kind of material, which is kind of the case for a lot of sporting films, because they do tend to be so male focused that the women are kind of like around the edges a little bit. But
yeah, it wasn't until Rocky 3 that Talia Shire really got a big speech on the beach to kind of give Rocky the kick up the arse. That's genuinely, Rocky 3 is something I had in my notes for this as well. Is because there's that moment when Chris Cooper, like where they talk about how great Seabiscuit is, and like Chris Cooper's like, yeah, but who's he been racing against? Before they kind of go for their big like, let's fight War Admiral. I'm getting my films. Let's race War Admiral.
You would watch like a film where two horses are trained to fight each other, though, wouldn't you?
Yeah. The kind of scripts of Rocky 3 and Seabiscuit got intertwined, and it's Seabiscuit is voiced by Sylvester Stallone, and War Admiral's voiced by Mr. T. I'd watch that in a heartbeat. Yeah, of course. But there's a moment in Rocky 3 where Mickey kind of says to Rocky, like, oh, you've been like you've been fighting shoo-ins, you've been fighting like kind of duds. Like this is a guy who's actually got some like punch behind him. Like this is someone you should fight if you want to prove yourself. And it's kind of like I like that kind of. It is just, like that was the moment it clicked for me. Like this is this is a sports movie. This is basically Rocky 3. Like again, has a Coppola connection because Talia Shire's in that film. So, is there any other moments that you kind of wanted to talk about with this film? Kind of like moments that you like. Is there things that you don't like as well? Let's kind of eke those out.
I mean, the bit that I really enjoyed was I always get impressed with like animal acting, and there's some nice bits about like Seabiscuit. So like when they first get him, he's quite like rowdy in his little pen thing, and they bring in a little horse companion called Pumpkin, and there's a dog as well. And apparently he did have like a horse companion for Pumpkin, and it was quite a common thing. So it was really nice to kind of learn a little bit more about like the horse. And when he's like lying and like sleeping in the grass and eating, I was just like, this is a horse that I can like fully empathize with. Like, it's a great character, and like animal wrangling is not an easy thing because, you know, they're animals. So I have a lot of respect for people who can get them to do things. Like when he comes and he's all bandaged up and he kind of like is limping like along to Tobey Maguire. It's like, that is some excellent horse acting there. So I think we should sort of acknowledge like how great the horse acting is.
Yeah, it's fantastic. There was definitely that moment when they bring in the companion horse. I like wasn't entirely sure what the intention of that was. I thought it was like a female horse, and like when Chris Cooper said like, "Oh, have a look inside," I was like, "What? Is he just telling her like to go watch Seabiscuit go at it?" I was like, "Where's this film going? This seems quite wholesome up until this point. What's this old perv doing?"
You're like, horse porn? Like,
Yeah,
where did that come from?
Yeah, and then I was like very kind of relieved to see him like kind of, I don't know, maybe it was post-coital, I don't know, kind of like he did have a cigarette on the go and kind of like looked a little bit knackered out.
It could have been a very different film, but yeah, you know, things like that are like really sweet and you know, true to the life as well.
What about how this film kind of like wraps up? Like we kind of talked about that kind of closing monologue, but yeah, like the kind of as you said, he kind of they both break their legs, and there's that kind of, I don't know, rise up like a phoenix. Yeah, what do you kind of make? Because there's some, I don't know, I love those kind of conversations we get between like it's kind of Charles going around to ask people their thoughts on like whether Red should race again. What do you make of those kind of scenes?
So it's interesting because it's a real moment of like, if he's going to do it, he could like potentially never walk again, and there's a lot of kind of emotions going on it. And I did a little bit of reading, and I don't think he actually won that race. I think he kind of like took a couple before he did come back and win. So there's a little bit of like creative license on that, but I think it really kind of like ends the story quite well in that, you know, if he hadn't have had that one last chance to race him. And I'm also a bit like, would that his jockey mate, have been in serious trouble if he'd basically slowed down to let another horse win? Which I kind of think is maybe a little bit of more creative license, but it kind of like gives them both like the one last glory moment together, which is really sweet, regardless of how like accurate I think it probably is.
Yeah, definitely. And I like I like, one of the things I like in this film is there's a lot of like mirroring and stuff like that, things that are said before and stuff like that. And one of the moments we get that is, I think, when they find out that Tobey Maguire's character is blind in one eye, and Jeff Bridges recalls a line back to the Tom Smith character by Chris Chris Cooper's character, and he says like, "Oh, we're not just gonna like send him out to, we're not just gonna give up on him just because he's not 100%," stuff like that. I found that really sweet. And then there's something, yeah, in that kind of moment when Charles is trying to find out should Red race anymore. He asks George what his opinion is, and he says like it's better to break a man's leg than to break a man's heart. I was like, oh, like
It's a
that's
good line, that
heartbreaking.
one.
Yeah, that's kind of heartbreaking. And then yeah, you get Marcel. That is a scene where Elizabeth Banks gets to shine, and we kind of get a bit more of the interior life of them. That you can kind of see the love that they have for each other. Like she's kind of like taken on this grief, and she's like, there's that like small moment with that little kind
Little
of
toy thing they've got, the
yeah,
little pinball thing.
yeah, and it's that like that's really like, do you kind of get that thing of like, oh, she's, I don't know, like yeah, that must be a lot for someone. Do you know what I mean? To kind of like take on, like I don't know. So yeah,
I kind of feel for a little bit because she's carrying all the emotional baggage of like all of the main characters, because she also sort of gets Charles to admit that his fears about letting Red race or fears about him dying, and he's obviously taken him on as kind of an adoptive father, and his fears of losing his son, and she's kind of trying to get him to acknowledge that, and at the same time kind of like trying to get Red to sort of process his emotions. So she does feel as though she's kind of like guiding everyone emotionally by that point, I think.
And I think in the filmmaking, it's seeded quite early that obviously like there's that arc of Charles kind of like not fully forgetting about his son, but coming to terms with that and kind of letting go somewhat, because we see when his son dies, he locks away the barn with all the cars in and kind of like that's it. And then we get that moment where it's kind of like a mirrored shot of the barn being opened and all the cars being taken out, and it's kind of given that new life to be a horse barn again, and kind of like they're going to start training and stuff like that. So when we get to the end, and we get let's hear Tobey Maguire's closing monologue before we kind of start to wrap things up.
You know, everybody thinks we found this broken down horse and fixed him. But we didn't. He fixed us. Every one of us. And I guess in a way, we kind of fixed each other too.
But like listening to that as well, like as much as that kind of it's a bit corny and heart wrenchy, that monologue, that score by Randy Newman is amazing. Like I was kind of shocked to be like, it's Randy Newman. Like I obviously know he's a composer and stuff like that, but like normally he's a bit more jaunty and stuff like that, and this is like a proper grand score, right?
There's lots of like swells going on, and it just really kind of like embodies the sort of emotions that are going on. And then at the same time, you've kind of got the sort of more energetic race kind of audio, and then those moments, it's just like really perfect, and it really complements the kind of like cinematography. They both go like really well together in kind of what you were saying, like it's sort of like your perfect kind of like mum and dad film. They're like these two elements are like the key elements to it, the sound and how it looks and feels. It's very warm, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got that kind of, it's got that thing of people of a certain, I don't know, or like certain disposition, they will enjoy this kind of, it's got a kind of like, I don't know, it is, and I think the public perception for this, like I was listening to a podcast, and they do like a movie draft from different years, and they did 2003, and somebody mentioned Seabiscuit, and it was kind of scoffed at, and I was like, it's actually like, it's like seeing as I've like literally just watched this film, I was like, is that the public? I think the public perception was me up until I watched this film. I think I was the everyman in that situation, that it kind of, it's schmaltzy, it's kind of like too Oscar baity, and it very much is a 2003 film. But I think there's nothing like there's nothing wrong with that. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, this is a perfect Sunday afternoon film, I think. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
yeah. Kind of a bit full from a roast dinner, kind of like, do you know what I mean? Like, get a bit weepy and then kind of skulk
Sleepy and
off to,
weepy.
yeah, skulk off to bed early, being like, oh, I'm fine. I'm not going to work tomorrow. I'll just go to bed. So, any closing thoughts on the film before we start to wrap up at all, Helen?
I mean, I think like the message at the end, they kind of like fix each other, and I think there's a lot to be said about kind of the power that animals have to fix us, and that I think a lot of people during like the pandemic and lockdown found that like our animal companions like really, really help them. And on one hand, this is kind of like a sports film, but also it is about having that connection with an animal that allows you to grow and heal. So I think that is like really beautiful, and I like that it kind of ends on that rather than sort of going on about, you know, Seabiscuit won this and it won that and it broke these kind of records. It kind of goes with like the heart rather than like the stats and things.
Exactly. Yeah. I think this film is kind of made from the heart, not from the mind. Like, even listening to Gary Ross, like, yeah, as I recounted earlier, like the way he assembled his shots and stuff like that, it's kind of, it feels like, and you can forgive the kind of schmaltz in the film for that it feels like it all comes from a good place, and kind of like, I don't know, the film wants to do better in the world, and the fact that they rehearse so much as well, and it's kind of a joy to hear that there was no like animal injuries, there was no kind of like major instances on set in the cast and stuff like that. Whereas, like, if I don't know, you feel like a film that was made by somebody who didn't, or a team that didn't care as much, do you know what I mean? You hear these kind of horror stories of animals were mistreated and there were accidents where they haven't kind of put the care and attention into getting everything right. And I think, as I said, it's a perfect Sunday afternoon film. So as we start to wrap things up, Helen, I always like to ask my guests, did you manage to find any Coppola connections in this film? Any people who have worked with the Coppolas elsewhere in their career?
So the only one that stood out was the one that we'd already mentioned, was Chris Cooper, obviously famously with Nick Cage. I'm pretty sure there's probably more, but that was the one that, without doing a massive kind of like tree thing, that was as far as my brain could connect. But there must be more, because they're the biggest filmmaking family in Hollywood.
That's what I'm here for, Helen. I'm here to connect those dots. I only managed to find 3 more, but I think they're pretty interesting. Jeff Bridges is in Tucker, The Man and His Dream, where he plays a kind of car designer from like kind of, I think he was like at the same time as Ford or whatever, like kind of tried to revolutionize the car. And that is a 1988 film directed by Francis Ford Coppola, when he was kind of, well, he dropped the Ford, so he was just Francis Coppola for a weird period in the 80s. And
strange time of his life that was, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, kind of.
You can forgive him for lots of things.
It's kind of 84 until like 88. He drops the Ford and then kind of comes back with The Godfather Part 3. And it's like, Francis Ford Coppola's back, baby. And then it's kind of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Then whatever happens after there, let's not talk about Jack right now. Another one is Gianni Russo, who he plays one of Charles's like hangers-on. I think he gets a line at one point. Plays Carlo in The Godfather, so Connie's husband, who betrays the family. Spoiler for a 50-year-old film there. And William H. Macy is in Benny and June, which was also a film that Jonathan Schwartzman was the cinematographer on. So that's our Coppola connections for Seabiscuit. So let's rate this film, Helen. The way we do that here on this podcast is I ask you, what is the perfect wine pairing for this film?
So this was an interesting one because I kind of stopped drinking. So I was trying to think what I would rate it as, and I mean, I would say it's a red wine.
Uh-huh.
It has like red wine vibes to me, and I'd probably say it's middle to top. I think it is
Nice.
the wine that you find in the supermarket that is normally a little bit spenny, but on a discount, you're like,
Nice. Yeah, on the offer. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
affordable, and you feel a little bit special. So middle, but top shelf on offer, but middle pricing.
Nice, nice. I like that. I like that. Yeah, it's kind of, and it's got aspirations. It's a bottle that looks like a label that looks really fancy as well. It's got aspirations to be the top of the top shelf, but doesn't. I don't think quite makes it because of the kind of, I don't know. It feels very much of the time it was made and doesn't have. I don't know. It's not an all-time classic.
But very, very like full-bodied and kind of like aromas of like wood chips and hay.
Definitely. Yeah, that's what we all want in a glass of red wine. So, based on Seabiscuit alone, are the Coppolas the greatest film family of all time?
I mean, based on this is probably a little bit of a stretch, but it's definitely a strong contribution. And I think for the ability to, on the one hand, be contributing to Bayhem and to this is very, very strong.
Perfect. And then let's wrap this up. And I always like to ask two questions at the end. The first one is probably one of the meanest things I've ever written down ever, which is, which Coppola family member would you keep? But in doing so, you get rid of the entire filmographies of the rest of the family.
I haven't stopped thinking about this since you sent it through, and such a hard question, like so hard. So basically, I'm like a huge Wes Anderson fan, like, and I'm just like, if I don't pick who has had the most contribution to Wes's films, then I lose them. But then also, if I don't pick Sophia, then I lose Lost in Translation. So, like, sorry, Francis, but I'm prepared to like say goodbye to The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, and like your entire influence on cinema from like the 70s, and everyone else. But I'm like trying to think, how is there a way I can keep both? I don't think there is, and I think when I first watched Lost in Translation, it kind of like moved me in a way that film hadn't done before.
Yeah, unfortunately there's no cheat code for Wes Anderson and Sofia Coppola in this podcast.
There isn't. So I'm going to keep Sophia, even though we want her behind the camera and not acting. So we can, we can get rid of that. But just because I don't think I'd really seen a female filmmaker like that, and just for Lost in Translation, I'm going to keep her, please.
Well, that's a perfect answer to lead me on to my next question: is what does Bill Murray say to Scarlett Johansson at the end of Lost in Translation?
I was also thinking about this, and for some reason, all I kept thinking was a line from Eternal Sunshine, like "Meet me in Montauk," which it isn't. But I'm going to go with "Everything will be okay," because I think he's kind of reassuring her that this will all just pass. Everything will be fine. And I know there's some interpretation that perhaps he's sort of saying, you should lose your husband, and then there's kind of like another interpretation that he's telling her how much like he loves her, and there's kind of like a weird sort of relationship going on. But I think he's just sort of saying everything will be okay. It's all fine. You've got this. Yeah. In the Bill Murray way that he probably would.
Amazing. I love that. It's a heartfelt and kind of honest answer. A lot of people use that as an excuse for a joke. So I like that.
I'm just not funny enough to have done a joke. I would have loved to have done something really witty and brilliant, but I just thought, it's Bill Murray. He'd be like, just everything will be fine.
Yeah, I like that. I like that as an answer, and I'd like that to be the case. Also, I would like to never know what was actually said. So, Helen, before I let you go, where can people find yourself and the Flixwatcher podcast if they do care so to find out what you guys are doing?
Please do. Please come in and scout us out. If you're looking for an entry episode, then please search out 8 Mile, which was your film pick. That'd be a good starting point.
Another sports movie wrapped up in a disguise of battle rap.
This is it. And you can find us by searching Flixwatcher, and you can follow us at FlixWatcherPod on Twitter, where we, when we're recording, we'll always put a shout out and ask for people's contributions to the episode, so you can get involved in sharing your views in there. But yeah, just search Flixwatcher and you'll find us wherever you get your podcast.
Amazing. Obviously, all that stuff will be in the show notes as well. And thank you so much, Helen, for coming and making some Coppola connections with me.
Thanks so much for having me.
And there we go, guys. The brilliant Helen Sadler to talk about the surprisingly good Seabiscuit. A very kind of, I don't know, it's a very like David Gray of a film. It's kind of a middle of the road, but like you probably like it more than you'd care to admit to. I guess that's my kind of feelings as I've sat with this film for a few more days. How do you feel about this film? Do you think that me and Helen were overkind to it? Did we give this film more praise than it's deserved? Feel free to let me know. You can do that on all the socials. So that is Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Letterboxd, and TikTok, all at Caged In Pod. Or if you want to drop me an email, you can do so over cagedinpod@gmail.com. So if you enjoyed this episode or any episode of the podcast for your first time, please head on over to Apple Podcasts, Acast, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this right now. Give it a lovely 5-star rating and review. And in your review, as always, remember to let me know what you think Bill Murray says to Scarlett Johansson at the end of Lost in Translation. If you're feeling even more generous and you're just like, hey, I've left the rating and review, what more can I do to support the podcast? Well, you can head on over to patreon.com/cagedinpod, where you could become a movie brat bro like the great people over there at the moment. So we have the fantastic pod daddy Jonathan Foster over there. We have my good man Russell over there. We have the lovely Max Pentecost, who provides the music for the movie Brat Bros as well. He's on the Patreon. And we have Super Marcy from the Super Network, fantastic collection of Australian podcasts. They're all on the Patreon. You want to be like them? Yeah, you can become a movie brat and get access to our exclusive Movie Brat Bros podcast, where we are currently looking at all of the films of the one, the only, the twisted, demented, and bloody fantastic Brian De Palma. It's a lot of fun. One of the newest episodes you'll be able to hear that's out at the moment is my chat with Rich Nelson of the Do You Want Me podcast, where we talked about Brian De Palma's 1987 crime film, The Untouchables. It was a bloody lovely chat, and I got some fun chats coming up soon for you guys, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So, as always, guys, I've been Petrus Patsilivus, your guide through the crazy world of the Coppola family tree. Remember to keep it caged in, and I'll catch you next time.